Hi, thank you. Yes, well, I have my props here. Here's the film that she just mentioned. This is Enemy Alien, my first one, which I usually get this question, and anyone is free to ask how this led to this film, which, you know, they're very much linked. This is my first feature, which is a kind of post-9/11. And I have postcards for anyone who wants them, who, you know, there's information on how to keep in touch with the film. And I also have a contact sheet, which maybe, Liz, could you facilitate passing that around? Because we definitely like to keep close to people who support the film and have seen it, because we need, you know, we have educational distribution and other screenings and, you know, publishing the DVD ahead of us, so, you know, we can use the support of the community for that. So...
We have a question here.
Yes, great.
I'm fascinated by the fact that some of the Japanese Americans or Issei either volunteered or were forced to go back to Japan, and I'm just wondering how they integrated back into Japanese society. Were they treated like gaijin and were treated with suspicion? Did you follow that line of that story to find out what happened to them and how they integrated?
Well, okay, first of all, I want to make sure people know that we have at least two of the people in the film who are here right now. We have Bill Nishimura sitting right in front of me. And we have Yukio Kawaratani, sorry. Okay. And we have other people who appear in the film are around. Everyone who is a Tulean, please raise your hand. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I said that before we went further. So you were asking about Japan. I mean, Grace Hata, of course, you saw these two kind of, these two very distinct experiences that Grace Hata and Jean had, Jean Tanaka. And yeah, there was so much more to Grace's, well, both their stories really, but Grace had just an incredible story of survival, which, you know, just didn't fit in the end. You know, it would have been really a film unto itself. And it had a lot of different aspects to it. You know, she had to work for the occupation, and she, you know, was basically like a bilingual administrative assistant there. You know, just a lot of ironies there, how she, you know, she basically needed the income to help her family survive. They were destitute. And the other aspect was, yes, she eventually was able to enroll in school, and she had this very harrowing experience where she, you know, was called out by the teacher for having her hair cut the wrong way, because she had sort of a, you know, you could see she has kind of a Western flowy hair, and then at the time it seems that school girls had to have their hair cut in no kappa, which is a very bobbed kind of, and so her teacher compared her to a prostitute basically in front of the whole class. And then she said she went home and she, you know, she raised hell essentially, which you would expect from Grace, and they, you know, they actually called out the teacher, and they, you know, they talked to the administration, and she made up her mind to go back as soon as she could, and she managed to, I think, get enrolled in a nursing program. There's a whole story about how she got back to the United States too. So that's just one experience, and I'm sure there are a lot of others. You know, like she said, she was called a fisheye and all these things. So it was not an easy experience for people to, if for lack of a better word, assimilate into Japan. And you know, I have to say that that's a parallel with situations today where they're trying to deport people who are really barely know the country that their parents came from or brought them from, and they're called dreamers. And that's really how we're living through another, you know, shade of this experience right now.
How did the Japanese that they deported, wasn't the war going on? How did the ships get into Japan to?
Well, the timeline is that it was somewhat after the surrender. This, you know, there's a lot of this dragged out a lot longer than it might have appeared in the film. But yeah, it was actually after the surrender of Japan, and the occupation. So the United States supposedly had, everything
So it
secured.
was after the
Right.
bomb was dropped.
Yes, after the bomb, after the surrender.
Was Tule Lake the only camp where this kind of thing was happening? In other words, were most of the people who were deported or sent back to Japan or had this brainwashing thing going on, was that like ground zero for that activity, or was this going on at all the other places?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of, I think, I have to, in the film, I kind of generalize a little bit. There was certainly resistance in other camps that led to people being moved to Tule Lake. And I believe that there was these, you might call them militant kind of societies that were around. Because the move to repatriate was pretty much present for quite some time, like from the time of the camps. So I don't have an exact answer for you. I believe that there were different groups, around in the 10 camps, but it was only in Tule Lake that that they really were able to be visibly present and be given free rein to to be visible and to have their activities, and people saw that as their right, actually, because Tokyo Yamane, he tells a story which I would have loved to include, but there just wasn't time. When he first got to the camp on the train, he demanded that they take down the American flag because this was the camp for people repatriating, as far as he was concerned. So, and they did, according to him. So that's kind of amazing to me that but again, as Tetsuden and other people say, this also showed the rest of the United States that, these were people, the enemy from Japan. It was a visible demonstration of that. And that's why they took so many great pictures of them doing these demonstrations, which you see in the revisionist movements. They pull these out. Michelle Malkin, you heard about her book, In Defense of Internment. This was like part of her thesis, was that, see, you have these shaved-headed, Japan-styled people running around, and therefore that proves that there was people who wanted to kill Americans. So that's part of a whole mixed bag of what this all meant to people.
I just want to thank you. My parents, my mom was incarcerated at Tule Lake. And first of all, my dad was at Poston, but he said that there was that tension also there at Poston. But this film helped me understand my family history because my mom and her sister were going to be repatriated. But there was a little bit of, they were not clear on the circumstances, and this helped me understand. And also, I'm here with my wife, and I saw my uncle. He was right there in the center, and he was one of those that stepped forward. And I don't know.
In the Block 42, or
yeah, and it just really helped clarify a lot of my family history for me, my own history. And I want to thank you so much. You did such a wonderful job. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Konrad. A fantastic film. I'm a filmmaker myself. I made a couple of films on Manzanar. My question, though, is,
What's your name? Sorry.
My name is Corey Shiozaki. I did the Manzanar Fishing Club, and I have another film that's hopefully soon to be, released this year about Manzanar. Thank you. About the
So I was talking about your film today. Yeah,
the
I want to see it.
Guayuli Rubber Project, which is another untold story. But your film is just fantastic. But my question, and as a filmmaker, particularly when it comes to the internment films, I was wondering about the photographs that you obtain that feature either the demonstrators, the guard towers, and the barbed wire fences, because one of the biggest challenges for me was to find that kind of insert and B-roll footage, depicting what the camps were like. And the War Relocation Authority photographers like Dorothea Lange and the others that Ansel Adams, of course, they were given strict instructions not to photograph towers, fences, and people with smiles on their faces. So how were you able to achieve getting those photographs, those very dramatic, photographs of the demonstrators, the guard towers, the barbed wire fences, the jails? I had to find it extremely difficult to find photographs that would, illustrate those points.
Yeah, that's a great question because, I know from my grandfather, I know that, generally they confiscated the cameras. That was the whole supposed rationale for removing people. They confiscated them before they even got into the camps. Yet you see a lot of pictures, family pictures. Mostly they're just people smiling, But I think, I didn't really consider that before because I was focusing so much on Tule Lake. I didn't really think about, well, do you have these pictures from other camps? I mean, my grandfather took a picture of a guard tower, I think, and I don't know whether he had to, how surreptitiously he had to do that or what. So I don't have an answer that I can stand behind for that because I don't really know exactly. But my guess is kind of related to what I was just saying was that, showing the shaved-headed Japanese Americans, lined up like that, because that was R.H. Ross who took those pictures, like the most striking, good pictures that you see that's showing the Hoshidan, and he was employed by the government. So I guess it fit in with their narrative that they had the Hoshidan, and then that they were safely in this camp, with these guard towers, so that's why they could bring in the militarized aspects of the camp. That's my conjecture. I haven't proven that, but that seems.
Personal photographs? Were there mostly personal photographs? Because I know too.
Well, there was little ones that were smuggled out. I'm just astonished that, like they have pictures of people being dragged around and stuff. And I don't know who took those, because those were, they haven't been claimed by anyone. I don't think they were government. I think they were smuggled out.
In researching my film, to get those photographs, we were lucky to get people who had family photographs. And although cameras in the beginning were just, they were forbidden, eventually, they kind of loosened up the restrictions and people were ordering cameras and getting developed through Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward. Was that the case with some of the photographs that you obtained? They were from family photos?
Well, I mean, the ones I'm thinking of are the ones like you actually are inside the jail. And we haven't been able to find actually what the source of those photographs were.
I feel like I've read somewhere that those photographs, like inside the jails, were taken by one of the prison guards. But they weren't supposed to be released. He wasn't supposed to take those photos. But they were just taking it as kind of like a fun thing for them to do.
Yeah, well, because we discovered at, it's a state university, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on which one it was, but they, right when we were almost done with the film, there's a couple of the pictures you see of military personnel, actually on a vehicle that has, a machine gun on it, and that they're in Tule Lake because you can see a barrack there. That's, to my knowledge, the only picture that shows, an armed. And there's another one of a guy with a soldier, like outside talking with the cook and some people. To my knowledge, those are the only ones where you see, the army presence in a camp. Because it was getting very hard to tell anything, to show that they were under occupation by the army before we found these photos, and those were taken by one of the army, and he has a bunch of other pictures of them, like I guess of their journey from whatever base they were originally at to Tule Lake, and it just was like a fun kind of thing for them. And then he has these inscriptions on the back, like, "Oh, Jap trouble." There's some people standing around, and she didn't want to have her picture taken. And there's like a woman running away because he's just like this guy, just like snapping pictures, So those are pretty. And there's probably more out there, but we were just barely able to snatch them up. Someone's going to was auctioning them off. You know, that's the thing. Another issue that's coming up. People are, you know, they're in private hands, and if they don't care really about the preservation aspects of it, then they can just sell them. And I tried to bid on them on eBay, and then I got slammed. You know, like and then it turned out that the person at Dominguez Hills, yeah, Cal State Dominguez Hills, they're, you know, thank God, like their materials person was on top of it, and he snatched up all those photos. And hopefully I didn't drive up the price too much by auctioning, you know. But and then he generously allowed us to use them for nothing, you know.
Hi, great film. I was just curious, you know, propaganda played such a big part of World War II, and I'm wondering, was Imperial Japan aware of what we were doing here with the internment camps, and was that ever used against us as a, you know, look how awful the Americans are, what they're doing to the Japanese people in their own country?
Right. Well, like the diplomacy that was going on. I don't know much about the Japanese propaganda. That's a good question. Like, it seems pretty plausible that happened. That wasn't really part of the story I was telling. But I know that diplomatically, when they had, you know, the stockade, there was someone from Spain was designated as the neutral party, I guess, that could negotiate for those prisoners. So, you know, you had the diplomat from Spain coming to meet them, but Japan, yeah, I don't know about the propaganda aspect, honestly, but that seems pretty, you know, it's something to look for sure.
Konrad,
Yeah.
I'm up here. I was born in Tule Lake, and my father was in the stockade that's in the film. And I want to congratulate you. I know that you've been to New York and have had many great receptions for this film. And I pressed you last year because I wanted to get a copy for my friend in Japan. And you said maybe after April, after Asian American Month here, because people in Japan are very interested in this subject. And I don't know if this answers the propaganda question, but I do know that at Tuna Canyon that they received a shipment of shoyu and miso, and it was given in small numbers because we only had 300 people, but the other camps received higher orders. So Japan was aware of the suffering of the Japanese and Japanese American here on this in the United States. So back to you, Konrad. I really want to ask if you think this film will be shortly produced.
Yeah, well, okay. The agreement with Center for Asian American Media is that they're presenting the film for national broadcast, right? So the idea is to target Asian Heritage Month, which is May, I think, right? That's what I've been hearing is May, and so you know we're still figuring out how that's going to happen. You know, so it has to be national, so it has to be something like Independent Lens, but those have all come up empty as far as programming the film. So we're looking at World Channel, which is something that you know they can feed it on a national level, but we're still waiting to hear about that. But then after there's a national broadcast, that's when under this agreement I'm able to sell DVDs. So that's where we are right now. So hopefully that will happen, you know, by May, and you know, and then we have to be ready for that, right? We have to actually have the DVD ready. So that's one thing I said earlier today in the meet and greet is that you know we can use your support. So if you know are willing to keep in touch with us and then think about contributing to our ongoing outreach and just getting this film distributed, you know, to the best of our ability, that would be a big help.
Konrad, I just want to congratulate you. I watched the evolution of this film, and it's getting better and better. So I'm looking forward to the next viewing. I wanted to make some comments on some of the questions, just the propaganda issue. the government created the 442nd because the Japanese government was criticizing the United States for putting Japanese American citizens into camps and criticizing them that, you know, how can this country be a democracy if you're putting your own citizens into camps? So they allowed Japanese Americans to prove their loyalty for whatever reason to go and fight and die for the country. That's one of the reasons why 442nd was created. I know there was a question about the photos also and the issues with like Dorothea Lange. There were a lot of photos that were classified. The government did not allow these photos to go public until recently. So there were photos taken in camp that were not put in public domain because the government did not want them to go public. And the issue with some of the people who went to Japan as renunciants, having interviewed a lot of them, depending on their language capability, if they were Kibe and they spoke Japanese very well, they could integrate into Japanese society, and a lot of them did stay there. Others who, some of the men felt sort of guilty, they joined the Air Force, U.S. Air Force, and served in the military and came back to the United States. There are several of those renunciants, a group of those men that came back to Japan, came back to the United States that way. But it really depended on the language capability and whether or not they remained in Japan or not.
When this gentleman asked about the availability of the footage, are there archives, or did you do internet searches, or how did you come up with this material? You know, are there centers that have collected them? Because you had amazing footage. And I think, isn't that what you were asking?
Yeah, well, if you see, like in the credits, like it shows all the collections we use. So it's a pretty long list, you know, they're everywhere, you know. There isn't just like one clearinghouse for, you know, and a very important one was JANM because they had the capability of not only preserving the films but enhancing or you know, with the color footage, you know, they made a new scan because I was going to use it in this film, and so it was a 4K scan, whereas before, you know, you'd have stuff on like smaller, kind of standard def, more grainy, and you know, since we're all in high definition now, they made a 4K scan, so that made a huge difference. But yeah, it was a lot of research. I had a really great archival researcher, Natalie Schmuel, who has a lot of experience with, you know, PBS documentaries. So she just worked the internet, worked the phone, and you know, and then you get it. Then you also have to get agreements, and you have to pay for this stuff. So it's a big, you know, which Corey can attest to, I'm sure. It's like a whole other. It's like, you know, it's a whole other. Like making the film is one thing, and then getting the archival is just like a, you know, just equally sizable like job. So yeah, it's a giant process, and then you know you're getting the rights to use private collections, you know, Morgan Yamanaka and all the subjects, you know, and getting their material. So, but that's what makes it real. I really wanted to have, as much as possible, to have all the images be actually accurate, like show what they're supposed to show, which is not always completely true, because sometimes you're showing one thing to show something else, you know. But I didn't want to show stuff from other camps, you know, for Tule Lake. Like I wanted to have everything in Tule Lake, and I think, you know, 98% of that is true, you know, except where I needed something, you know. But as much as possible, there's a correspondence between what you're supposed to be seeing and what you're looking at.
What made the difference between when people were incarcerated? There were some people that said no, and they actually went to prison, like Leavenworth and different places. Because I know a couple of those gentlemen. There were 62 that were.
Talking about the Drafted Sisters or something else?
Yeah, the Heart Mountain group, correct. And there were several that were actually went into prison and served time.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That was quick. Yeah, it's a different thing. I didn't become as much well-versed in that as you know, the stuff I carved out for this film. Although someone said, oh, you should include that, you know, but I just felt it's not like it's totally different, but it's, you know, it just brings in a lot of other questions, and I just decided to treat it as a separate thing.
Thank you for the film. I learned
so much, but I'm curious about Wayne Collins. Can you talk a little bit more about him and the case that he...
Yeah, I mean, that, of course, had to be kind of breezed over because, showing a 20-year process in a film is not, the most, when you're getting towards the end, yeah, it was a very, just a huge undertaking, and I hope I gave a hint of what this man did for this community. Like, and it's not, it was completely single-handedly. He had the help of, I made sure that Tex Nakamura, who also was there working on this project, was in the film because I thought that was important. Yeah, it just was getting, because the government, which was very, very quickly explained, the government was basically trying to dodge the question of whether it was right to make these people or give these people the chance to renounce their citizenship in this atmosphere of this camp where you could not really make an informed choice about anything, because you had no access to information. You were being threatened by the military, by some violence within the community, and so that was a legal question that should have been pursued. But instead, the government tried to make the case that they were actually dangerous. So what they had to do was they had to get an affidavit from each person that they actually were subject to duress. And they wouldn't accept like a blanket argument like, duh, I mean, this happened to everybody in the camps. You had these really violent, upsetting, traumatic things that happened. But no, they had to have an affidavit from everybody. So that's 5,000 people. I know from just getting photographs from 5 people, then that it just was a gigantic undertaking. So that was what the government just passed off, as the burden of proof for them to have their citizenship back. So that's one reason it took so long. But so that was a heroic act, on Wayne Collins' part, because he did this without, he did this on his own. The ACLU was not really behind that. They sent people there while the camps were, while people were still in the camps, but they didn't really have the motivation to resolve this question for the renunciants, because I would conjecture that it's because they were bad people, right? Because they were people who, were not loyal to the United States in their mind. But it also, the fact that all these affidavits were made also opens up some questions about the accuracy of this thesis, right? Because it's a question of how bad were the Hoshidan? Were the Hoshidan really attacking people and intimidating them? Was it really their fault? Because basically, a lot of them said, okay, I was terrorized by this pro-Japan movement. But was this what really happened, or were they saying that because they had to in order to get their citizenship back? That's the question which you would have to look at critically to really, make conclusions about what happened overall.
I just want to congratulate you. I really love the film. I think it's very powerful. I had a couple of, times where I was about to cry because of the powerful information that you were able to put together. And obviously hearing the experience of people that were at the place at Tule Lake right here in the audience, I guess it's just an amazing congregation to be talking about this important topic. And also the fact that you acknowledge the persecution of other people today, right? 70 plus years after that, with this small portion with the Dreamers, but not limited to them, to all these other immigrants that are being persecuted today. So I just want to ask this question that, so how the younger Japanese American generations are coping with this lack of social justice for a community, and if there is this trans communication between, for example, the Dreamers and the young Japanese American community.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that. I know from Facebook that there's a lot of great young people who are really active. Just to name one, there's Joseph Lachman up in Seattle, who's the head of the JCL chapter there, which is pretty young. He seems like he's in his 20s and he's the head of a JCL chapter. Like, I sort of assume that we're supposed to be like, earlier generation or something. But yeah, so there are some great young activists around there who are making these connections, and yeah, it's very inspiring to see, that that the torch gets passed on, and made relevant and effective for today.
I was at a meeting several years ago and running on this type of topic, and on Tule Lake, one of the people in the audience popped the question to me about the Black Dragon Society. They thought that would had a lot to do with it, and I had no background. I still don't really know anything about it, so I throw the question to you.
Someone's asking about that. Yeah. Well, I don't know a lot about it. Like I remember hearing Tetsuden Kashima talking about it, and this is, I think, from what I understand, Black Dragon Society is something that was, seen as a pro-Japan, before the pro-Japan kind of group before the camps ever happened. So people use it as a way to say that, there was, basically the camps were justified because you had pro-Japan people. I mean, according to Tetsuden, it was just kind of a place where guys went to get away from their wives, really. It was just, they would hang out, smoke cigars, and drink, and, I mean, but I don't, that's not like a historically researched statement coming from me. From him it may be. But that's certainly, there were differences of opinion, because you had, wait, who's, Bill, you and your dad have a hero, right? Who was a lawyer here in Little Tokyo. That was.
Oh.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
I was.
Right.
But Seifuji was. Right, was someone who was a very influential person. But one thing that's interesting about him was, as I understand, he was supportive of Japan's view of the war, or it wasn't like he was advocating attacking Americans or anything, but he didn't feel that Japan was wholly wrong in their opposition to the United States, right? Because obviously there's a question of who has the right to be where, in the Pacific, but that's what I kind of understand. So it's not like anyone who had any support for Japan at all was out to kill Americans. It was just a difference of opinion about what your home country was doing, really. But
well, Fujisei was like a California Daily News publisher, and he helped the Issei's who did not understand English, and so whenever the problem comes up, farmers would go over to Fujisei and ask a question. And this question applies to all Issei's.
But didn't you have the chance to meet him when you were in the actual enemy alien internment camp after Tule Lake? Did you meet him? You were in there with him.
Sure.
Yeah.
I met him in Santa Fe. And you know what? He was judging the war situation simply by subscribing to all the main newspapers like New York Times, and Washington newspaper, Denver, Los Angeles, all the major newspapers. He subscribed and kept all the editorials. And that's how he judged how the war situation was going on. Yes?
So, yeah, so pro-Japan, has some different shades of meaning that, you can't just put in the same box, I think. So, but yeah, do we have time for any more? Okay.
Hi there. Really cool movie, thanks. I'm a screenwriter and I'm really interested in dramatic depictions of Japanese American internment. I was wondering if you know of any dramatic films or TV series that allude to some of the events in Tule Lake specifically, because I haven't come across any.
Yeah, you'd think I would, have a confident answer about that. I don't think so, because it's kind of a hard subject to explain. I mean, to include wartime incarceration in a dramatic film is hard enough, to explain. But then to define what Tule Lake is, I think is kind of hard. I don't know, but maybe other people here know.
My uncle was the subject of a documentary made in Japan called Zen and Bones, and he was incarcerated at Tule Lake. So if you get a chance to see that, is a dramatic depiction. And the museum actually helped to have a viewing of it last year. Yeah, at the local theaters. So it's called Zen and Bones, and it's now going in Japan and worldwide.
Thank you. And that's a documentary, or is it a dramatic?
It's a dramatic documentary.
Got it.
Does anybody else in the audience have any dramatic? I feel like there was one being made or that's currently being worked on, or at least they included a scene where there was a dramatic depiction.
Tule Lake, really?
Yeah, of Tule Lake. But
Yeah,
I'm
I'd
not
like to
sure
know
if
about
anybody
that.
else has any information on that. Please let us know at the end of this.
Information, but I'd like to know, has anything been in written form, a history of Tule Lake? Well, what you presented today to me is extraordinary.
Well, Barbara Takei and Roger Daniels are working on what aims to be a definitive book. Well, I mean, there have been books before, but as well, there was a sociological kind of book that was written called The Spoilage, which was written pretty soon after. But Barbara Takei thinks that it has a lot of problems, I guess, as far as how they got information and some. So, and I think there are some other ones that focus on different things about Tule Lake. Yeah, I should have a reading list up on my website. But there's a big question about whether any of the things that have been done to date really kind of have a whole picture. Because there was a researcher named Rosalie Hankey, I think, who did a lot of work there, and a lot of the materials from her. But Robert Takei, again, thinks that her methods were very suspect, and that she had a lot of confusion about how she was going about getting the truth. So there needs to be kind of a look back, and that's what she and Roger Daniels are working on.
Well, the reason is that given the nature of the current political situation, what the government is prepared to do is so unscrupulous, it is so devastating, that I'm sure it will be repeated again and again. So people need to know the links.
Yeah.
It will go.
Yeah, I think this story has a life beyond this film for sure, and so I've got that in my mind.
So Konrad, could you please give us any closing words? Please let us know once again how we can stay in touch with you, where we can find information about when the screening is going to happen, and where we can eventually purchase the film.
Right. Yeah. So well, if you can get on that list which was passing around, and then also I have postcards and business cards here, which are neat. They have different pictures from the film. So like there's 3 different ones, and I like them a lot. They have this one and that one. So you can collect those. They have the information, and then if you just get on our mailing list, we can let you know about the public television broadcasts, the DVD availability, other screenings in your area, and you can also reach out to us because we don't have like a whole team of people arranging screenings. A lot of it is people coming to us. So. If you have a venue to suggest, and also different kinds of venues. I'm interested in doing outreach to immigrant communities, to Muslim communities, other civil rights, community-oriented communities that would have some common ground with this film. So it's really up to any of you who are interested to determine where this film goes in the future. And that's it. I really appreciate you coming. I'm here for questions. Yeah.